And this is the cremaster muscle. And then this would be the transversalis fascia that's shown, which I'm not going to include. And so we'll go to the green line, which is the peritoneum. You guys remember the definition of a serous membrane from Bio 430? It's a simple squamous epithelium that lines the body cavity and secretes a watery fluid. So in the lungs we have the pleura, around the heart we have a pericardium, and in the abdominal cavity we have peritoneum. Right? Parietal attached to the body wall. Attached to the organs would be visceral. Correct. So this is a serous membrane that's attached to the abdominal deep surface of the abdominal muscles. And remember, it comes in only on the anterior surface. It does not completely surround the testes. So I'm going to write the lettering in black because the green isn't showing up very well, but this would be peritoneum. And here it forms the tunica vaginalis. And that would be this structure here. Typically, that's a collapsed fold or sac. It can become filled with fluid, and in that case, it expands and creates a swelling on one or both scrotal sacs, known as a hydrocele. It just needs to be drained. It occurs you see it most often in young children or even infants. So the hydrocele can be spelled a couple of different ways. The more British way is with it that way. Here's the way it's spelled on the slide. So that's just the fluid-filled tunica vaginalis. Hydro meaning water, cele referring to sac. It can be, well, what's happening is the serous fluid, the peritoneum is secreting a serous fluid. What triggers that is often an inflammation, or it may be that it's not completely collapsed. There may be extra vascular supply to it. Or it may have an opening to the peritoneum wherein the fluid of the peritoneal cavity drains into it. In other words, I don't really know each time. There's some possible causes. So again, this is in Netters. It's plate 254, I think. Now, back to this picture, there is a blood vessel that comes off. This is the external iliac. That's going to become the femoral blood vessels. And just prior to the anterior abdominal wall, the inferior epigastric vessels are formed. And the reason I mention that is that it helps in locating and identifying the two different types of hernia. So here's the anterior abdominal wall. And here, there would be another one over on this set. These are known as the inferior epigastrics. They just supply blood supply to the anterior abdominal wall. But if we look at the deep surface of the anterior abdominal wall, here is that vessel, and I'll write it on the board. And you can see that the deep inguinal ring is lateral to the inferior epigastric vessel. All right. So if this is our right side, here would be the deep inguinal ring. And which would be the inferior epigastric artery and vein. Deep inguinal ring. Why is that important? Well, there are two types of inguinal hernia. The hernia is a weakened condition of a muscle. So usually allowing an organ to protrude through that. A hiatal hernia, for example, is a weakness in the opening of the diaphragm around the esophagus. And the stomach can push up into the thoracic cavity through that, or the folds of the intestine. And of course that then compromises how much the lungs can expand, or the heart can fill with blood. Some babies are born with an umbilical hernia, a weakness in the region between the two umbilical, the rectus abdominis muscles. And so especially if they cry a lot, that can cause that umbilicus to stretch open, and you can have a small couple-inch diameter high mound of intestines pushing through that for the infant. So an inguinal hernia is a weakness in the muscle wall that might be congenital but exacerbated by heavy lifting, anything that increases intra-abdominal pressure. And there's two ways for the intestinal loop to penetrate and end up in the inguinal canal. Either type of hernia, it can end up in the inguinal canal. The direct inguinal hernia goes straight. It would be medial to the inferior epigastric. It goes straight through this weakened layers of oblique muscles and fascia and ends up in the canal. The indirect goes through the deep inguinal ring. Now to me, that was always confusing.
It sounds backwards.
Yes, it does, because it seems like the most direct route would be the easiest. Think of direct as the straightest. All right, if I am a loop of intestine, the straightest route, the most direct route for me to get out of this building is to just go right through here, bulldoze my way through the wall, and get outside. It's going to take longer if I then have to make a right-hand turn and then make a left-hand turn to get out the door. All right, so that's the indirect route. It's not the straightest. So the straightest is just to plow right through. You can only do it because this wall is weakened.
Where does it go through when it's direct?
It goes through the abdominal muscles themselves, the obliques. All right, so if we were to go back and look at the diagram here, the direct is going to do this. It's going to come straight through all of these layers and end up in the inguinal canal. Notice that that is medial to our inferior epigastric vessels. The indirect is going to come through the deep inguinal ring, still end up in the inguinal canal. The problem with both is the increased likelihood that as the intestines are twisted and compressed, there's the lack of blood supply and gangrene that can develop, as well as intestinal blockage.
Can this happen in boys and girls?
Uh-huh. It's more likely to occur. It's not as likely to occur in children unless it's a truly congenital condition. We typically see it in middle-aged men that don't have very strong abdominal muscles and lift things without using their knees. You know, just kind of bend over and lift straight up, or have a lot of problems with constipation and straining at the bowels. And the intestine may not permanently stay in the inguinal canal. It may only appear under pressure and then disappear when the pressure is over.
I was just going to ask, so if the muscles are strong, that wouldn't happen?
Not as likely unless it's a congenital condition. So here's a couple of images. So this would be the direct. So here's the deep inguinal ring and the inferior epigastric vessel. I don't think you have this in your lecture notes. And here's the loop of intestine. And it's going to come straight this direction, but still end up, may or may not come through the superficial. It may just stay in the canal. All right? Or an indirect. Here's the same, here's a loop of intestine, but it's passing lateral to the inferior epigastric vessels going through the deep inguinal vein. So back to this diagram that you have on page 50 again. It's easier just to draw a line. That's direct. Following the canal itself is indirect. So back to this image, when we look at the content of the spermatic cord. So the spermatic cord is this structure that we find in the inguinal canal and coming down in the scrotum to the testes. Its layers are going to be the same as the scrotal sac. So it's going to have the external spermatic fascia. It's going to have the cremaster muscle. If we open that up, we see the vas deferens, what the sperm is going to travel through to get to the urethra, the testicular artery, the red structure here, and a branching form of the testicular vein. If you identify that as testicular vein, you would only get half cut, all right? That is not wrong. It is the testicular vein. But in this format, with all that branching, networking-like structure, it is known as the campaniform plexus. And that's the answer that I'm looking for. May I erase this picture? You guys okay with that? So, what do you think would be the purpose of having that arrangement of multiple branching vessels? Cool them. All right? So, to cool the blood supply entering the scrotum. The whole reason why we have the testes outside of the body core cavity. If we allowed arterial blood at 98.6, it would be bringing that warm temperature in. So, to illustrate, whales that live in the Arctic Ocean, that's pretty cold water, they live up there because cold water holds more oxygen, and more oxygen means more biomass. So there's a lot of food. But they're warm-blooded animals. Okay, they're mammals. And so the flukes have a lot of surface area, but they still need oxygen. So as arteries carry oxygenated blood out to the fluke, that cold Arctic Ocean is going to conduct away a lot of heat, and the veins are going to have near freezing temperatures as they carry that blood back to the abdominal cavity, and then the whale's going to have to spend even more energy to warm it up. So to prevent that, the whale tail vessels, fluke vessels, have a similar arrangement where the arterial blood going out towards the fluke is surrounded by veins, and there's a countercurrent exchange. And the heat from the arterial blood passes by the cooler venous blood, and the heat is transferred. That cools the arterial blood and warms the venous blood. As the warmer venous blood moves this direction, there's still heat transfer because it's coming in contact with even warmer arterial blood. The arterial blood has been cooled as it moves towards the fluke, but it's coming in contact